can't see my screen. Yes. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the second session from our arts practice-based research seminar series. I am super happy about this seminar series. I said that to you last time that I was really overwhelmed by the amount of people who got in touch with me to book for the session. But I think what happened afterwards is just really, really wonderful. So we have, as I said, over 100 people who booked in for the session. We had about 230 people who've watched the first session recording, plus we had over 50 people joining the first session. So obviously what that means is that clearly there's a need for us as a community of practice-based researchers to talk about what we do and how we approach what we do. So I'm really, really pleased about it. Again, I'm going to only take 5 minutes in this meeting, so you'll be pleased to know that I will not overtake this meeting as it happens last week or last time. And there will be an amazing guest speaker today. Plus, we're going to have some time for discussion. But the reason I wanted to take 5 minutes at the beginning is to come back to some elements I've mentioned last time, which is to do with all the things which accompany this seminar series. So what I've mentioned is the special issue, which is going to be published for the International Journal of Creative Media Research, which aims to almost mimic what we're doing here in the seminar. Now, this is now official. It's already online, and the submissions are open. So I'll share some details with you at the moment. Now, what we also decided to do that we will, because there's so many of you doing so many incredible types of practice-based research, and many of the things are really unexpected. I had lots of people emailing me after the session, the first session, and talking to me about what they do. And I was really, really amazed at the scale and variety of work and experiences here. So what we decided, we also gonna additionally open for the call for special issues for the same journal. So if you want to run and edit a special issue on anything to do with the creative media research, we have opened a call for that as well. So I'll share the details about it in a second. And of course, there's also the conference/festival, which I've mentioned last time. So with two colleagues from my department, I'm running the interdisciplinary and international conference/festival, which is called Communities and Communication, with the theme this year, Diverse Voices. And again, of course, this festival/art festival section to it is an indication of what we're looking at is practice-based research. So you can either choose to contribute your artwork or film to the festival side, or you can have a paper in a conference, or you can have both or kind of joint. So this is still open. So the deadline for this is actually in December. For the other deadlines, I'm gonna mention where they are in a second. And if you want to get involved in a seminar series in any other way, if you want to suggest any topics, or if you want to perhaps talk about your own experience in round 2, also get in touch. So very briefly, the special issue, which is titled Recontextualizing Practice-Based Research, has a deadline in January next year, so 14th of January, because obviously we're almost in December right now. And what we need at that point is the abstracts. So the abstracts are between 300 to 500 words. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna review them and get back to you by 4th of April. And the final article will be standard size, so between 7,000 to 8,000 words, with, of course, any elements which could be videos, sound, or any other documentation of your work, because after all, we are focused on creative media research. So there's a link to this over here. I can paste it in a chat later on after the meeting. And of course, you can just get in touch with me, because I'm the point of contact for this. I'm editing that issue. So if you want to get involved, you can just get in touch with me, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. The second thing, as I said, is the special issue. So at the moment, the deadline for this is in December. On purpose, I haven't included it here because I think we're going to extend it. So at the moment, this is just basically an idea of what kind of special issue you would like to run. So we're looking at anything across media studies, communication and cultural studies, arts and design, music, creative writing, drama, dance, performing arts, film, screen studies, education, you name it. This is, of course, not a limitation. You can have some other form of practice base. We'll be more than happy to hear from you. So again, you can send an email to myself or a colleague of mine, which is here on the slideshow. Again, I'll include all this information on the in the chat, and presume that all of you are in my mailing list, and all of you should be also in the Microsoft team, which I created for this seminar. So I'll include all this information over there. But again, if you have any additional questions, I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. And I promise I will keep it really, really short. So I think this is where my 5 minutes end. So I'm just going to pass it on to Michael, who's going to introduce himself right now, and he's going to talk about really, really amazing work he's doing, which links so nicely with the to the theme of this seminar. So Michael, it's your turn.
Okay, can everybody hear me first? That's important. Right, great, lots of nods. Fantastic. Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for attending and coming along. It's really appreciated, and there still seems to be people joining as we start. So that's really great. You've given your time up, so thank you for that. Thank you to Agata for the invite, of course. Really excited to be part of this and part of the wider things going on with the seminar series. And then a quick thank you to Sam Horan, who is a MA Negotiated Studies Fine Arts student at Staffordshire University. I'm supervising Sam on her Masters, and she's going to do a bit of an introduction to the reading after I've finished my presentation on the work that I'm doing. So a little bit about myself. My name is Michal Brathwaite. Obviously, I'm Associate Professor for Fine Art and Integrated Practices at Staffordshire University. I think integrated practices, that term is something that I plan to own, if you like, or define. But essentially, a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment isn't necessarily collaboration. It's more integrating into other institutions, programs and research objectives. So I see it more as integration than collaboration at the moment, and that's why we chose that title. And we'll see how it pans out over the next few years, I guess. And I'm also a course director for visual art at Staffordshire University as well. So I have quite a broad range of things that I manage, take care of, or input within the institution. So the bit you're probably more interested in is my background as an artist and a researcher, and I guess the in-between space between those two things. So in around about 2014, I started collaborating with Caroline Sturdy-Coles, Professor Caroline Sturdy-Coles, who's also from Staffordshire University, for a project at the Treblinka Museum in Poland. Caroline's background is forensic archaeology, and my background is visual art. And there was a need to find some kind of visual form for the work Caroline was doing. And that's where it all started, really. So I'm going to open up the PowerPoint now. Obviously, before that, I was still an artist and I was still had my interests. But I think in terms of working alongside or with other disciplines and alongside or with institutions and focusing on how a practice-based approach can add to their dialogues and discussions, but how it can also feed my own practice as an artist. That's kind of where we start today's seminar. So just one moment and I will get my screen up. Okay, so this all worked in the test, so I'm hoping you can all see a PowerPoint presentation at the moment. Please speak out if you can't, but it all looks okay on my screen, and as it did in the quick warm-up we done before. So, okay, I will get going. So, obviously the title of this seminar and what this presentation is based on is academic creative process meets academic rigor, how those two things come together. And I guess what I'm going to talk about a little bit as we go along is how I work beyond just artistic research and how that in terms of journals and other publications and how that can be disseminated to wider audiences and through different channels. So we're going to start with a picture of the art exhibition at Treblinka. I think the first thing to mention about this is that the initial idea that myself and Caroline had was that the artwork would be integrated in and around the archaeological exhibition, which you'll see a bit later on. And due to changes in Portland at that time, with what direction the museums and museums were taking, the main display could only have work that was considered factual in it. So there wasn't the room for interpretation that an artwork might give, and that's why it ended up in this separate space here. But this is just an image to give you an idea of what a visitor would encounter. Very quickly on the right is Jenny Steele's chair. There's my work, a pan, which is the plinth-based work. Just up on the right of that, as you look at the image, is a text-based work by Hilary Jack. Straight ahead, the plinth and projection is an installation work by Janine Goldsworthy. And then on the left is a microfiche work by Dave Griffiths. So this slide gives you a bit of background into what was going on, so what happened that led to this exhibition. So it's probably worth noting that the archaeological exhibition, archaeological research had already taken place at this point. So the findings were already there. So this changes it slightly from the projects that I'll talk about as we go through, in that the work had already been done from the archaeological side, and then it was the artwork, if you like, or the art project that needed to then start addressing the issues of what happens with that information. And I think the last point there, I'm not going to read these bullet points out. I don't do that when I do presentations. You can read through that as I talk, but I will pick bits out of them. Is the last bullet point that's bold there: simultaneously providing access and critique of the new findings with the intention of creating points of discussion that disrupted the scientific and historical narratives. So it was very much using the artworks to start discussions about the if you might say, the more solid fact-based archaeological findings, because as we discovered, the archaeological findings weren't actually 100% conclusive. They raised questions. They actually challenged some narratives in history that had already been very well established. And so it was quite a complicated process for I guess anybody going to the exhibition to start looking at objects, looking at artifacts, and thinking that actually they're kind of unraveled a perceived history rather than actually solidifying a perceived idea of history. So on the second slide there, I highlight challenge prevailing paradigms, possibly communicating would not be possible in other fields. And I think that's very much where a practice-based approach to art making can come in. You can maybe ask questions that can't be asked in other disciplines for various reasons, and often the process of making art, the process of being creative and exploring and experimenting with materials, means that you aren't necessarily always mindful of the things that the interpretations that might be made of the work. And I think that offers opportunities for the institutions that I work with to maybe talk about things that they wouldn't be comfortable just bringing up in a conversation in their own right. So these are some of the questions, and I think this is where the idea of practice-based research kind of finds form. It's kind of what are you trying to do? What are these questions? So it's very much, what am I going to try and do with this project? What might happen? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it does happen, but I think it's actually framing it in that way that makes it a practice-based research project rather than for want of a better term, making some art about something. You know, you're actually going in there with an agenda that's defined, and you're looking at processes that in some way will start to elaborate or allow these wider conversations to emerge. Just a little bit here about what the context for the research was. So a couple of quotes there. So art is usually something that is objective, while academic products such as articles, books, and written testimonies are looked on as neutral, historically correct, and representative of the truth. So it's kind of something beyond, or something that sits alongside or around a perception of what historical facts are. And then the other thing is to bring a discussion about mirroring evil, which was at the Jewish Museum in New York, which really is kind of perceived as the test bed, if you like, of what is permissible in terms of dealing with the Holocaust and representations of it. There's quite a lot of writing about that exhibition. And, you know, was it right? Was it wrong? I guess the fact that it's there and it's talked about means it's done something in terms of artistic discourse and in terms of his Holocaust discourse. Whether it's right or wrong is maybe something for another discussion. So just to give you an idea about what all this is, rather than just lots of slides with bullet points, this is the archaeological museum, archaeological exhibition going together. Just a little bit of a light-hearted comment from the side. The plinths that you see there were manufactured in Staffordshire University, and the perspex work was manufactured in Denton on the edge of Manchester, including that 1 metre by 1 metre perspex cube on the right. They'd never been put together, and they made their way to Poland from Staffordshire University in Stoke-on-Trent on a van. Our flights to Poland to install the exhibition were then delayed, and yeah, all this got unloaded from the van and put in a barn. So if you imagine that clean, pristine work, and the kind of the heart rate and the nervousness felt during that day and a half of it beating us to the exhibition site. So some insights. So these are the some of the artifacts that the artworks were based on. Myself and Caroline led the curation of the exhibition, and we commissioned 5 other artists. And this just gives you an idea of the kind of information they were looking at and what they were being exposed to and asked to respond to. And if you look at the top left there, that's a pan that was found on the site, which I'll discuss a little bit more as we go through, because that's an artifact that I base my work on. These are the publications that go with the exhibition. I think it's important to include these. It fits in, I think, with the theme of academic rigour in relation to practice-based research, in that, yes, there's the exhibition, but there's also opportunities there to discuss more in depth and to reflect and make papers and journal articles, seminars, whatever, that interrogate what you've done a bit more. So it isn't just having an exhibition and really liking how the exhibition looks, if you like, the aesthetics of it. It's actually about then interrogating, well, you know, what did we do? What did happen? What processes did we use? Can we learn anything from that? And what impact or what meaning might be construed from it? This is the permanent exhibition as it was installed, just so you get an idea of what was happening there. This is just a shot from the opening night, just to give an idea. The exhibitions opened on the same day as the celebration or the remembrance of the uprising at Treblinka. So there was in excess of 2,000 people came on the day. So it was a really great way to get the work seen and get the work engaged with. And despite it maybe appearing to be very contemporary art, if you like, or challenging in that way, that it was really interesting that nobody actually questioned its validity as art or asked why it was art, or even if it was art. They're just directly engaged with the subjects and I guess the agitations or problems that the work was putting to them as visitors to the site. That's just a recap of the individual artworks. The exhibition then went on to the Wiener Library, where it was incorporated with the archaeological findings. I think one thing that don't mention probably enough is that at the Wiener Library, the exhibition came together and we had a lot better, we were in a lot better position to analyse what the audience was thinking and doing, just because the Wiener Library is in London. And we could work with them to gather data. And on the left is my work at a pan, which I'll talk about in just a second. So this is where the work came together. So the exhibition kind of morphed as it changed, and we got lots of information from the Wiener Library. I think possibly the two most interesting things was one from a visitor who was from Germany, who said that he found it really interesting that the work was being done by people from countries that might not have been directly affected by the events or impacted by the events, and so he found that a really positive thing. And I think that's really interesting because it's one of the things that I'm most nervous about. So that I think that was really interesting, that actually stepping into these situations, you do actually have something that you can offer. You do have a different perspective that can be valued. And then my work on the left, the pan, was it was questioned the most, but also came up as the most interesting. So I was really curious that there was what might be conceived as negative comments. I don't think they were really negative. People just like, I don't fully get it. But then in actually thinking about why they didn't fully get it, it was the thing that they remembered when they left. I'll talk a little bit more about that work in the exhibition. It had 4 different descriptions of that particular pan. And the process that I went through was I selected the pan because that was a very mundane item. And in discussion with Caroline and looking at all the different things that have been discussed and her experiences of being on site excavating this material or getting it from walkover surveys, was that there was lots of different ideas about the pan. One of the survivors felt that that was evidence that there were people there, or other people felt that was evidence that people believed that it wasn't an extermination camp. They were going to go on and live somewhere else or be resettled somewhere else. This is one of the stories about Treblinka, that it had a fake train station, so it looked as if victims were arriving at a legitimate site, and actually that wasn't the case. Others feel that it's from the 90s, and it's just somebody who had a picnic and left the pan there. So I was really interested in all these different interpretations of the item. So you have this rotating pan in the display, then you have the frosted display, so you can't exactly see what the pan is. You can't make it out. You can see it's a pan, but you can't get much more. And then you have 4 different interpretations of that pan. So it's actually offering up a discussion about, how do we relate to these objects, and the fact that the history of them is always open to debate, even though the object itself might be very solid and factual and real in the world that we live in. Okay, so next I will move on to the accessing campscapes. This is a project that came from, or grew out of, if you like, the Treblinka project. It was a project with a team of, I'll just move this on. So yes, it was teams from all across Europe dealing with sites of mass interment across the European continent, and trying to look at ways to address Europe's traumatic past. And I guess my kind of project, if you like, was to visually address that. At the same time, because I was a resident, if you like, on the project, so I went to these sites with them. I also witnessed the discussions. I witnessed the scientific work going on there. So on the right there, on the lower side, you can see a ground penetrating radar survey and the data that's coming out of that. So I kind of witnessed very abstract things, and then I witnessed very if you like, social things, social discussions. But we also went for a meal in the evening and that sort of thing. But when but then spent the day on these sites where very traumatic events have happened. So yeah, so that raised a lot of questions, and I think that's where practice-based really becomes an asset, because you then respond to those questions. You're not, if for want of a better term, trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You then redefine the questions, you redefine what the project is about, what the artwork is about, and use that as a way to move forward and create some sort of dialogue. So these were the aims and objectives that were defined. And yeah, just some example pictures of artworks on the side of how they came about. Let me just have a quick swig of tea. So yeah, so define aims and define objectives of how we're going to move forward, what's going to happen. And I think if you sort of set about how you are going to encounter a project, then that kind of has certain parameters that allows you to develop work within that sort of set. And the question becomes, how do I use this information to construct an artwork? What can I do with that information? I think if there's not objectives, that is maybe kind of a pure artistic response, if you like. It's sort of this just gives a bit more drive, or it's less subjective, it becomes more an objective sort of challenge. A few more examples of the kind of information that I was seeing, but I was kind of seeing this, a lot of this being produced on site and then accessing it from other members of the team. So these are some of the insights. Again, I'll go to the highlighted bit. So the process of investigation, I collected lots of videos, I collected lots of photographs. Were video collages, trying to bring these disparate materials together. So there were things like when I was walking around Treblinka, the nature there is phenomenal. All kinds of animals, and it's really reclaimed the site, if you like. But then, so that's kind of a natural history. But then you've got a human history, which is in this kind of very narrow 3 years window. Very different things happened there. So how those two things impact and work alongside each other, and then how the scientific information kind of brings another aspect of that, another complication, if you like, because that's finding new evidence that challenges a lot of the facts that have been established, and this is an ongoing process of facts being re-established and challenged, and yeah, that's kind of a constant thing. And I guess what I'm interested in as an artist is getting a visitor to understand and think that, so to not necessarily look for the truth, but look to the truths, and just to try and think about all the different potential elements there that might come about. It's worth saying that revisionism and yeah, the sort of legitimacy of certain arguments that probably wouldn't have had the platforms that they have now in 2014 when the project started. It has, yeah, it raises other questions about what artists do. I think that's more of an ethical, moral thing, and I guess that's something that might come up in the discussion on the end. And yeah, it's kind of covered in that last bullet point. Fact and expression of experience need to be taken into account. These are some of the artworks. So very briefly, in the top left is the Treblinka work, Total Station. I filmed the architecture, forensic architecture team from Staffordshire University, but I only filmed their hands and their equipment. So it was actually them handling the scientific equipment. I filmed the natural world around there, and then the background, which is a rolling background, was actually a flyover LiDAR survey of the site, which then challenged where some of the boundaries were. So it sort of changed the perception of where the boundaries were. And that doesn't sound like a huge deal, but if you're going to go there and investigate, having a firmer proof of where boundary is actually really important. And it's also another truth, if you like, another fact that has been changed. The bottom left there is ground radar. That was from the workshop in Westerbork in the Netherlands. That site has many layers of history, but there's also things like you can hire a bike to ride around the site, and I was interested in how that seems like quite a leisure activity that one might partake in, but then the site is kind of, if you like, more serious than that. There's also radar stations from the 60s that are still there, and they're still being worked. It then became a Maluku camp for the refugees coming out of Indonesia after the Second World War. Before the Second World War, it was a refugee camp for Jews fleeing Germany. So it's got these many different histories, and it's a similar format to the Treblinka work, apart from it uses the ground penetrating radar and color palette. So this kind of track down the side and then the lines going across. So you're kind of looking at it through a scientific lens, if you like, and the background is a similar sort of thing. That's the LiDAR of the site. So it's kind of multiple screens, multiple framings of different activities happening at that site. On the top right is of species. So what you're looking at there is actually a pig farm built on the site of the Lety concentration camp, and on the underneath is a text narrative of the facts about the site itself. So when I went there, I was really struck by the fact there was a pig farm had been built there, covering most of where Lety was. It wasn't exactly on the top, it was kind of to the sides. And it's called Of Species because I think what alerted me was the way the animals were being treated and the way that humans can treat each other, and there seemed to be some kind of poetry, some kind of analogy there. So I kind of wanted to shock people and surprise people into thinking that this is a place of internment. It is a place of suffering. I think many people would agree that farming is that. Not the kind of suffering that happened at the camp itself, but that analogy is there, and it looks like somewhere where living beings are contained. So there's a bit of a sort of a tension there between how we reflect on ourselves, how we might critique ourselves as a species, and then the last work is on the bottom right. That is the approach. That is from the Stoneflower Memorial at the Jasenovac extermination camp in Croatia, but on the Croatia Bosnian Republic of Srpska border. And the sort of blurred images there is a camera approaching that monument. One view is from Zagreb, and the other view is from I've completely lost my track. From the capital cities of the different Belgrade in Serbia and Sarajevo. So you get these three different perspectives of the same monument. So there's regionally there's a real tension with who owns that monument, the barbaric acts that happened there, and kind whose history is it? So I was trying to capture that three different histories, kind of from three different angles, but one monument, kind of bringing all those together. Okay, so now we are moving on to a project that's kind of just finished, but it's also kind of ongoing because the Falstad Museum and Human Rights Centre in Norway is now, I'm now working with them to make this an actual exhibition, a physical exhibition. So it's a really interesting project in that it came about through COVID, if you like, because there wasn't the physical access to the site. So I was looking at ways in which the internet acts as a conduit or a window or a lens for these sites. And again, I guess it's that bringing out the possible misinterpretations or the possible kind of slight misregisters that might happen. So Petar Koshula was a Yugoslav Serb who ended up in the north of Norway in the Falstad concentration and extermination camp. And that's just such a massive journey, really, from from north to south Europe, and I found that really interesting. So I've gone through his testimony and looked at what we can identify as his journey, and then used Google to then pull images in to match with that journey. So on the bottom you have an excerpt from his testimony, and then you have the images that came from Google. So I've kind of removed myself from that process of selecting the correct images, but offered a sort of a contemporary journey, or a contemporary journey that might raise questions about how we perceive things, how we see the past, but also how the internet plays a role in that. And Falstad were really interested because of where they are. They do get a lot of visitors, but they also know that even their visitors will often access the website and then visit, or visit and be interested and then access the website and other online sources. So yeah, they were interested in working on a project that would I guess bring about the discussions, bring about the problems or the problematic way that the internet might give information. So this was one of the works for that. I also got access to their archive, their digital archive. I should have said that I was in Stockport in the UK and couldn't travel, obviously during that COVID lockdown. But the opportunities that arose, I found really, really interesting. So on the left you have Eric Weber, who was one of the commanders of the camp, and the objects that they were buying or having made, which were then being sent off as presents from the perpetrators to their families back in Germany. And then on the right you have my rendition of that, if you like, made from things that I could find around my house. So yeah, that's kind of my plate. That's some of my daughter's stickle bricks. That's a little ornament that I found on the mantelpiece. So it's kind of looking at these equivalents, but I think it raises questions about how we connect with these images, how we connect with the past, but also how, for me doing this, it was almost performative, because then I was seeing the mundanity of this and thinking, this life I'm living, for somebody else who's living a similar life that time ago, but connected with, human suffering, human death, and occupation of another country, but still making these decisions that I'm making. And there was something about that process and what was allowed through the practice-based nature of it to sort of engage with that question, engage with that experience. This is one of the latter works, but some of the reading I was doing, I found this really interesting. I've just underlined that bit on the top left there. It's documented becomes an integral part of the occurrence in the event. Thus, a person who listens to the trauma will, to some extent, experience the trauma. And that seemed to connect a bit with what was happening. Now, the other thing that happened was, and this was a coincidence, but an interesting coincidence, was I was interested in the reading I had done was one of the events that really impacted me and affected me was when the Jewish inmates of Falstad were made to clean the leaves from the courtyard, only using their mouths and on their hands and knees. And I was trying to get close to that. It's kind of the documented becoming part of someone who lives the experience, even though I know that experience will never be the same. But it was how can I, in a terraced house in Manchester, get close to that? So I went in the garden and I seen some leaves and I thought, okay, I'll do it. I'll just actually do that and just see what it feels like to in some way connect with this site across the sea in another country, and in some way connect with this event in history, which is now actually testimony. Now, at the same time, all of a sudden, it came out on the news about this TikTok phenomenon of people dressing up as Holocaust victims. And I think it still goes on a bit as well. So it's maybe something that'll be discussed later on, but again, yeah, this moral, ethical thing, I was going through a process. I was completely oblivious to this happening. I think it just came up on a Facebook feed or something like that. Otherwise, I really just wouldn't have known anything about it. So yeah, that then led to quite a different experience. Now, since then, I have visited Falstad. As a part of an advisory board for another project, but I did then get to see the actual tree. And on the left here is some of the images, just as I was trying to sort of replicate this this occurrence. So this is these. I guess this is practice pulling things together, and there's not a resolution for this at the moment, but just these two images beside each other and bringing these this proximity into much closer alignment. I find really interesting. So that this is very much a work in progress, if you like. Again, this is work in progress. This is for a commission at Westerbork, not for another year or so before that comes about. So that is a guest curator / artist using photogrammetry. What I'll be doing is I'll be working with the some of the 3D scanners at Staffordshire University to make objects collide. So I'll be working with the historian from Falstad to identify objects from different periods in its history, these different distinct periods from labour camp to transit camp to Moluccan camp and so on and so forth, and collide them together. And I don't really know how that's going to work, but that's why I'm finishing on this as the last visual slide, because I don't know how that's going to work, but that's the practice-based element. It's kind of what will happen. That's the research, if you like, when they come together, and how can I make them into some collegiate kind of new object. So with the historian, we're sort of using the term hybrid histories, hybrid objects, so that they're hybrids of different moments in time. And the reason they wanted to work with myself, from their perspective anyway, was that they like the way questions are raised. They really like a Pan, the Treblinka work, and Falstad has more different periods in history than that site. So there's potential for plinths that are octagons with octagon side, 8-sided perspex cases, and actually the case kind of acts as a conduit to how the object inside is understood. They're just ideas at the moment. And then this is just some reflections on my experience. So, and there's something we might take into the discussion after Sam's done her introduction, but yeah, kind of why are they working with artists? Is it because creative or practice-led, practice-based practitioners can bring about discussions that can't happen somewhere else? Why are the disciplines interested in this approach? They have it as well. We're not exclusive to it. I'm talking about as an artist or a fine artist, and sort of lens-based, slightly technology, sculptural practice. What's the context for it? What does it allow us to do? I think the thing for me that I wanted to mention here is that rather than a commission, because I've worked on commissions in the past, is that they feel a lot more defined from the outset, whereas a practice-based approach feels a lot more like a project. So I think it's very particular partners who would want to deal with that and would want that. So I don't think it's necessarily for everybody. In my case, in terms of working outside of just the white cube, if you like. In practice-based context, I think it offers more potential for outputs rather than just an exhibition or an artwork. I think because of the questioning and the reflection that happens during the process of making and the process of exploration, that feeds a lot easier into seminars, papers, and conferences. I don't think it's exclusive to that. I just think it flows easier into it. So that's the end of my bit, so to speak. So I am going to invite. I'm just going to stop my slideshow. This is the bit where I suddenly go like, oh yeah, there are lots of people looking at me and listening. After talking to a laptop, it always gets me that. So Sam, are you good to go? Do you want to give a thumbs up? Yeah, and thank you very much, Sam. You're really brave for doing this, but it's a really good one. You will have to unmute your mic, and I'm going to mute mine.
Hello. Yes, I'm very nervous. Sorry, bear with me a minute while I collect myself. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for the opportunity to join you today. My name's Sam Horan. I'm a postgraduate fine art student here at Staffs, and it's an honour to be introducing the paper to you this afternoon. In about 5 minutes, I'll be opening the seminar to questions for Michael, so if you could prepare for that and get your questions ready, that would be great. Michael, as you know, is an Associate Professor for Fine Art and Integrated Practices. He's also the Course Director for Visual Arts, Joint Course Leader, and also the Coordinator for the A2A scheme at the university. He's also an internationally exhibiting artist, and his research combines creative practice with archaeological methodologies to explore other objects and their meanings in society through sculptural and digital-based artworks. Shortly, I'll be answering questions on representing and exhibiting archaeological findings through artistic practice, a paper that he co-wrote with Professor Caroline Sturdy-Coles, Professor of Conflict Archaeology and Genocide Investigation, as part of the Forensic and Crime Scene Department, also based here at Staffs. The paper discusses the role of the artist as a researcher, the contribution of creative practice to the collective understanding of socially sensitive subjects. It analyses the challenges faced by artists and other researchers throughout two interdisciplinary projects, which Michael discussed earlier, Finding Treblinka and Accessing Campscapes, Inclusive Strategies for Using European Conflicted Heritage. The paper also discusses how these challenges can present pertinent, if difficult, topics of discussion, and how through a combination of documentation and creative representation, the team were able to curate several exhibitions of art, and including artworks that facilitate these discussions in a manner that maintained a balance of respect for the dignity of the victims, contemporary political sensitivity, and maintain the integrity of the research. From individual site-specific research to the wider international IC Access project, the paper gives a distinct example of how effective interdisciplinary practice-based research projects can result in profound contributions to the discussion of contentious topics. It bridges the gaps between historical and human understanding through the rehumanization of the people involved and the objects that they left behind, as a testament to the traumatic events of those individual sites. I'd like to thank you all once again for putting up with me kind of speeding through that, but I am very nervous. I think I'm probably well within my 5 minutes, but if it's all right, I would like to now begin the questions because my heart's racing. So I'd like to begin the questions by asking Michael, do you think there are any limits to the transferability of methodologies within interdisciplinary research? And if so, what are the hidden pitfalls that researchers might want to look out for when moving forward with their own projects and things?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. You're doing really good. You don't have to be too nervous. Yeah. I think there are limits, definitely. Identifying them, I think is. I think it's an art in itself because different projects, different disciplines, they all have different areas, and I think if one of my interests in archaeology was that it establishes narratives from fragments, and I was interested in that as an artist. because as a sculptor, I was starting to get interested in 3D printing, as well as at the time a bit of a fan of Time Team on Channel 4. I have to admit, it was, yeah, that's where it sort of started, or and just kind of documentaries, if you like. And I guess I was interested in the idea that object or artifact can create discussions or build on and make discussions. But there is a limit in that. As an artist, I was, if you like, fabricating the object or fabricating the context with which it engaged the audience, and I don't think the forensic archaeologists kind of have that luxury. That's very much what they've found is what they've found, and it needs to kind of be addressed in that way. So yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities, but I think there are definite gaps. One of the things, just reflecting back on that Treblinka project, was that I think about 2/3 of the way through, Caroline quite liked the idea of being an artist, and I quite liked the idea of being a forensic archaeologist. So we got really involved with it, and I would say that's one of the pitfalls. Actually, you can get really consumed by these other disciplines and think, hold on, is this? Am I doing the right thing here? I've revoked that now. I've realised that it's actually just something I find incredibly interesting and motivating to do for both professional and personal reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're right. Is that the time? Is there more questions from you, Sam, or is it the time we can open for everyone else to ask more questions? Oh, I think you still muted.
Yes, I knew I was going to do it at least once. There is one more question I wanted that was actually specific to the projects that you did. If I can find my paper that I've just put to one side. When discussing the final works, the work that you did at Pan, you mentioned in the paper there's a recollection of a survivor from Treblinka, and highlight the importance of this first-hand witness testimony in providing a deeper understanding of the items. Do you believe that this, or do you think that this speaks of an urgency in collecting, or sort of a time sensitivity with regards to collecting that kind of information, the sort of the real first-hand sort of evidence kind of thing, the personal testimonies?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think what you bring up is it's really interesting, because I think it also brings in a lot of other things that are happening at the moment. So it's not something that I do or I'm really exploring in my work. It's kind of gone in a different direction. But interestingly, there are researchers at the university who are interested in that, capturing these final testimonies, because the first-hand accounts are, there's not many people left, really. Can't really put it any other way. So yeah, there is an urgency to do that. What then becomes interesting for me and my projects and working with Bas at Westerbork and Ingborg at Falstad is that they're also aware that as those voices fade, what then moves in to take their place, and that's a real feature of a lot of our conversations. So it's not something that projects I'm working on now are directly dealing with, but it is something that is that I'm aware of, and it's within some of the works and some of the research streams that I'm working on, although it's not the direct kind of discussion going on. More so at Westerbork, because the title of that project is how do we see Westerbork? How do we experience Westerbork? So I think it's really interesting what Bas has done, really. Before me, there are some Roma going to use the space in their way. There is a Jewish group's going to use the space in their way. And various different groups that have ownership will have a series of exhibitions, and then my exhibition will be at the end, which is in his terms, which is quite an interesting term that we might also unpick a bit later on, is the academic artist response. But and I'm not saying this to flatter myself, but yeah, he said we want to work with an academic artist because we want that rigor in the work. We don't just want artworks about Westerport. We want somebody who can handle the information, work with the information, and develop artworks and exhibitions out of that information. Whilst being mindful of the wider context that that they have to deal with, the challenges they have, which is, and I might as well say, because it'll come up, is people arrive at Westerport. Now, it was a transit camp. You might say its claim to fame, although that's a bit flippant terminology, is that Anne Frank was there for a short period of time before she was put on the train to Auschwitz. So people arrive and say, where can you show me where the gas chambers are? And there was never gas chambers there. It was never an extermination camp. It wasn't even really a concentration camp in that context. So they have this real challenge of, how it is seen and what is it and how they operate. So yeah, I think I've gone off on I've gone a little bit off piste there. But I think that's why there's an urgency now to deal with the vacuum left behind from that testimony, and for a younger generation to own the sites, and a younger generation to build the new narratives, build the new discussions that go with those sites. They have to move on. There's a new generation who are really familiar with handheld technology, the internet. Thinking about the Falstad project and the aspects that I explored in that. So there are they're just different channels for this information, but those channels have contexts and ways of influencing the nature of the information and the encounter with it.
Thank you. I'm done now. So if we could open it up to anybody else that's got questions. Thank you. And
thank you so much, Sam. Jess.
Thank you, Michael. It's really fascinating, your work. I want to sort of just poke around at something that you mentioned, and then it sort of disappeared quite quickly. Was this idea of how do you feel about the fragility of your own personal perception when you're dealing with the modern politics of the history of these camps and the people that you're meeting, in respect to your, the rigor of your research and then your artistic interpretation?
Oh, good one. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not a robot, so to speak, and all this comes from a place in myself, if you like. So I guess I'm talking as a person and an artist now, not as a professor of some sort. Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing for me is when I realised how mundane a lot of the decisions around the Holocaust were, and read some of the sort of psychological text, that I wanted to pose a question, and it terrifies me and it terrifies everybody when I'm in a room. But there's this thing that anybody could have done that. We can't kind of exclude ourselves. We really do not know how we would have behaved. And the fact is that a lot of people behaved in not a very humane way. So evidence is that most people probably wouldn't. But it was when that changing from anybody could do that to I could do that, that's when I got totally terrified and thought, actually, I think I have to start dealing with this and kind of making work that opens up those discussions. So yeah, and I totally understand the nature of your question, because the next thing is kind of, that's not necessarily what I want to get across in the work, but it's kind of the motivation to make the work. So then I'm just going back to your question. So yeah, how do you frame the research? Well, my idea of framing the research is kind of not necessarily making people feel like I do, not necessarily making people feel like that. I don't think that's necessarily possible. But I think certainly trying to put them in a position where they might have those thoughts or similar thoughts, where they might question their own position, their own relationship to the history of themselves. And for me, as an artist, I think if it's done in a way that there's a plurality, I can never get that off my tongue, nature to it, it becomes quite interesting, because certainly recently, because of developments in UK politics, I'm now kind of interested in the history of my own country, and how have we ended up where it's actually a conversation in the national press about getting some jet skis to push dinghies back into the channel with people on them. At what point did that actually become something that could just be a conversation? How did it get to that level where that could actually be something that was talked about? And then going to the research and framing the research of your work. Yeah, I mean, I guess a bit of the nature of your question seemed to be how also kind of a bit of how do I protect myself a bit, and I think I really do have to protect myself. I do actually get emotional about it. Maybe I'm good at hiding that, I don't know. But there's a personal drive there, no matter how fragile I feel or the impact it might have on me. And I've never experienced anything negative. People I worked with have experienced negativity in online forums and things being sent to them. And the heist project that I'm on the advisory board for, that was quite interesting, that a lot of the artists were asking how they would be protected, and worried that because their name was associated with the project, and the two artists in particular ran a business, so because of the legality of businesses in the Netherlands, and I guess here as well, I've not looked into it, you can find the address of the business, so actually very quickly somebody could get their address and go back to it, and then they were then kind of concerned about, I guess, what you're raising, and then what's your role? Are you just a conduit? Are you a researcher, or are you actually a person, an agent in society, making change? And that's something that I think I'm all of that. I think when I'm working on it, I'm more the artist. I'm just working with material, an artist researcher. I think when I'm reflecting and in conversation, I'm more the person with a passion or desire to make sure that these sort of things stay in conversation, and that the conversations that I had about them are kind of pertinent and contemporary.
Fantastic, thank you. I personally have plenty of questions, but I would like to still open it to anyone in the public before I take off. So if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and speak, or put it in a chat.
I've got a question, Agatha and Michael, if that's okay. Hi, yeah, thanks very much for the really interesting talk. Yeah, Michael, I was just wondering, because in the paper, as I understood it, you were talking about the relationship you had with the people you were working with, and how that relationship kind of, you learned a lot from them and you were able to change your practice from them. But did it, I wasn't quite sure how it went the other way around as well, and whether they were able to kind of change what they were doing based on kind of your artistic practice, and if so, in what ways that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak on their behalf from what I know. Obviously, it's that I don't believe anybody's made it to speak on their behalf. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about their practice as such, because if their practice is forensic archaeological investigation, I think that's probably more influenced by other means, although we had lots of interesting conversations. But I certainly think there was an impact on what they then do with that information and dissemination strategies, and that a widening awareness, although I have to say that kind of discredits them because they were actually very open in the first place. But yeah, a widening knowledge, widening sort of perception of how different practices can be used. I'm being really careful here, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Yeah, it can be used to convey the findings that that they've discovered or that they're working with. And the reason why I'm saying I'm being quite careful there is because one of the things that we discussed quite early, this has gone back to Caroline and the original Treblinka project, was that it would be about artistic research. It wouldn't be art in the service of archaeology. So the artworks, and this was what we built into the project brief that we gave to the artists. You know, the artworks must offer something beyond just a re-representation. They must offer a new angle, a new discourse, or a new further understanding beyond just making the scientific palpable to a public, a more general public. So I feel like I'm kind of avoiding your question because I can't speak directly on their behalf, but I can say it has impacted, and they do continue to work with people within Staffordshire University in a number of different departments. And I'm sure me and Caroline are meeting in a few weeks, and something else might come from that. So it is an ongoing dialogue that we have. But yeah, directly influencing their methodologies in terms of forensic archaeologists, I have to say I doubt very much, but I don't know for certain.
Great, thanks.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, I'm going to take the opportunity of this short gap, and I'm going to ask one question, if that's okay, or maybe more than one, Michael. So I think I wanted to thank you very much for kind of bringing your presentation back to this topic about this the kind of tension between artistic practice and research, because that's really, really interesting in terms of this kind of research. And I know that I know from my own experience how difficult it is to work with subjects which are very sensitive and which involve human suffering, and how sometimes it is difficult to identify what your place as an artist should be in this kind of context. Now, in your text, you say quite nicely that, and you kind of touched upon that a moment ago, that science and art can together enhance public knowledge. And I think this marriage between science and art on the example of this kind of project is really quite useful. Now, what I'm really interested to ask you is perhaps it's not even a question, but some kind of reflection in relation to your audiences being these secondary witnesses to what's happened in history, and how in this process objects are, as you describe, having this agency, communicative agency. So they are basically designed to communicate, and perhaps I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but my understanding as I was listening to you was very much about how this object gained this agency by the context of dissemination. So obviously, by taking them out of the original context and placing them in a gallery, they become this kind of perfect impersonation of art working in a very, very close correlation with research, even though this division is obviously very artificial just for the purpose of us having this discussion. Would you mind providing some kind of comment on that?
Yeah. Let me just have a little moment to gather all that together. I think there's a fine line, and I'm always very aware when I'm just putting something somewhere else and saying encountering it here will be different. I think the agency for those questions is, to me, developing that agency is kind of the research, and it is my practice, if you like. So it's taking these signifiers, these points, and I guess, if you like, twigging, nudging, I'm not quite sure on the right word, just to sort of drive different agendas, different perspectives. So with a pan, I mean, one thing with a pan, which you might be interested if we're reflecting on this, is that when it was in the Wiener Library, it was actually a pan out of my cupboard in the kitchen. and when it was in the Treblinka Museum, it was the actual pan itself, and we had a lot of discussion about this, and in the end we thought, well, actually, in a way, this is actually proving the the surrogacy of the object as a point of discussion, because all you have to know is that there's possibly a pan there that's possibly connected with this site and this research. But it's that's kind of something I would talk about here is is a research question, but it's not something that's it doesn't make anything up of the work, if you like. It isn't kind of a factor in interpreting that work, even though everybody in this this session now knows that and will look at the work slightly differently. So yeah, am I getting anywhere nearer what you were looking for reflection on there?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, it's not really as much as a question as this kind of, I think it's just really interesting how we, this kind of idea of thinking of this kind of objects as having agency to communicate something. I really think that context of how we even think about it, and it's just really so meaningful. And I think your anecdote about pan in this kind of context is just really revealing here. I'm just going to take the opportunity. I know Rebecca says she has to leave, but she posted, she typed a really interesting question in the chat. So Rebecca, would you like to unmute yourself, or would you like me to read it?
I'm fine. Thank you, Agatha. I'm happy to read it. I just wasn't sure I could say it off the cuff and it mean it, it makes sense. But Michael, thanks for sharing. What I was interested in was hearing you speak to what you think happens when the visual language of science kind of meets your art practice. So, whether you think of it as sort of co-opting it or incorporating it, but it then appears in your mm-hmm. contemporary art visual language, and what happens along the way with that slippage? Is there something lost in translation or gained? I'm particularly thinking of your video works, I think, where you're using that below ground radar or whatever.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. Mm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's incorporated. I think the way I would understand it is that co-opted, it might be if you were taking it and using it as an aesthetic in its own right, for argument's sake, to develop a painting or an abstract. Whereas I think for me, it's definitely incorporated. So I think there is something lost in translation. But for me, I guess I'm talking about what I try and do here, what my intent is that there's enough left for that kind of trail to go back to the scientific. And obviously the artworks don't exist like we see them here. There's interpretation panels and other kind of things that point out the different elements within the work when you encounter it in a gallery or in one of these museums or visitor centres. So yeah, for me, it's definitely incorporation. There is something lost, but I think what is potentially gained is that you don't have to have the scientific understanding to then start questioning or building a knowledge of a relationship between the scientific and the personal, if you like, or the dry facts or data of science and the soft, squishy nature of human experience, if you like. So I think you lose a bit and you gain a bit in that respect. I don't find that problematic, but I do get the question, because I think if you completely lost it, then you literally just you're taking something as a tool to do something else. So I think there has to be something of it left in there, and you might be interested that in early discussions before I really got to know these people, because I know them really well now. We meet each other a lot, and well, a lot being twice a year, which is a lot for an academic. Early on that they were bringing things to me that had aesthetic value, so things with lots of colouring, and look at this information. It comes in kind of neon, and thinking, oh well, you're an artist, you want that because you want to make something that's engaged with through the visual sensation, if you like, visual impact. And some of my work is, I do use it in that way. But yeah, it was quite interesting. But then as things went on, they actually realised that I was interested in a much wider spectrum of information and experiences that brought in historical testimony and scientific information to being on the site and discussing things with the actual researchers.
Thanks very much, Michael. That's really great.
I think there's also a comment from Lynn and someone else. Mr. Martins, would you like both of you to unmute yourself, or do you want to leave it in a chat? I'm not trying to. Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I really, the idea of working with the objects the way that you have is obviously needs to be dealt with in a really sensitive, sort of ethical way. I'd love to know, how did you manage this, and which theorists, if any, have influenced your management of how you went about this?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. I think this is. It's not. Well, it is part of the research, and I'll explain that in a moment. But if I just stick to the ethical kind of side of it, I have to be honest that there isn't any theorist that's necessarily that I have a strong affinity with, or that I feel kind of as some kind of overarching governance of how I'm working. The way I deal with it is very much with the memorial centres themselves. They have the best knowledge of their audiences and what those limits are. Now, I'm an artist. I'm educated in the modernist idea of an artist, which is to challenge boundaries and test limits. But I think the ethic, a lot of it comes from respect, and that's something that I have had to build up to sort of say, I'm for want of a better term, this comes from a colleague at MMU, Dave Griffiths, who made one of the artworks for Treblinka. He said, you're kind of shooting from the hip with other people's disciplines. So how do you kind of get that relationship where you trust each other and you know what you can do? And one of the early discussions with Caroline in particular was just, I might say things that are really wrong. I'm not the specialist in this. So I just want you to know, stop me if, I'm absolutely fine with that. So I think a lot of it is to do with building a relationship with the people you work with, and using their experience and knowledge. So one of the discussions I'm having at the moment, I didn't mention it before, but you might be interested, it might fit into this, is the execution site in Falstad's, about 2.5 kilometers away from the centre itself. When I do my residency there in April next year, I'll be based in the Commander's House, which is part of the Houses of Evil in the European Context project that I've been involved with. And one of the things I wanted to do was to have somebody shoot a firearm at the site of the execution and then record that sound in the Commander's House, so that I would get an idea of what the commander might have heard in that house, maybe doing something quite mundane whilst there was multiple executions happening, just 2 or 3 kilometers. I just find it really hard to believe you couldn't hear it. And I'm just interested in reintroducing the proximity of that violence into a house, and then how that might reflect on the commander. Anyway, obviously Norway, and thinking about the terror attacks that have happened there, we then had to start going to negotiation. And I guess in effect, look at more scientific ways to bring those gunshots into the house. So that's very much came about through discussion with the centre. They're fed back to me. And again, it was that case of, these are my ideas. This is what I'm interested in doing. Can we just run through them? And I'm very open and flexible. If you say, no, I won't push it, but I'll tell you why I want to do it. I'll tell you the motivations for it. And I'll tell you what I would like to happen, or what I would like the audience to experience, what I would like them to encounter, and how I feel that connects with the history of that site and the events that happen nearby. So I think I've gone somewhere to maybe answering your question, but in a nutshell, it is lots of ongoing conversations and getting lots of different perspectives as well. So quite often for Falstad, myself and Ingborg, we can't come to a conclusion. Sometimes it just goes to the director. With Peter Krushula, that's gone to a research centre in Belgrade to just kind of say, how, what's your perspective on this? So we just gather different perspectives. And from that, I guess, predict as best as possible what a reaction might be. I think Westerbork's going to be really interested with some of the Roma artifacts, because they have some sort of relationship with that community, but it's a fraught relationship, and they try really hard. And I have to say, in my experience, they are unbelievable in their persistence to try and maintain that link with that particular community. But yeah, if I want to use a photograph of somebody from that community, or an artifact, even a scan of the artifact, then yeah, we will have to check with that community. So there's lots of different local sensitivities depending on the centre. So if we reflect back on the approach, the artwork at Jasenovac in Croatia, that is just not going to be shown in the memorial centre there. It just isn't. The conversations are just no. So there was a thing there, but I didn't then just say I want to show this work. I was these are the things I'm interested in doing. These are the things I think would be useful given the nature of the conversations we've had. And yeah, maybe it will at some point. Yeah, interestingly, they want to show it in the Netherlands because it can't be shown somewhere else. So I think there's something quite interesting that Westerbork would like to show that work, and at some point Bergen-Belsen would like to show it there, but because it can't be shown somewhere else, I think there's something really curious there. So yeah, again, I hope that went somewhere to respond to or answer your question in some sort of meaningful way.
Thank you.
Fascinating. I'm so sad we're coming close to the end of this meeting. I think there's so many things we could still discuss. I really like this idea of hybrid histories. Another thing I think would be worth discussing at some point, if there is a chance, is to think about the role of those collaborations played in the way you approach your artistic practice. And one of the things we won't probably have time to discuss it, but one of the things I found really interesting is perhaps the question: how different would your work be if you were working with collaborators from a different discipline, still within the same topic, if you like, or perhaps if you're just working as a solo artist? I'm sure it would be a slightly different. I don't know if you want to provide like a very, very brief answer to this, if you have any reflection on it.
I mean, what I can tell you is the people who manage the exhibitions at the sites that I work at, they've relayed to me. I've not seen this, so it's a little bit hearsay. But to give some context to what you were saying, they get lots of proposals for exhibitions that A, they can't put on, but B, are and this is their term, and it is a term that's used. It's it's Holocaust pornography. It's kind of it's to do with the deaths, the suffering, the number of deaths, and they understand that, and they want that in their sites. They don't want to belittle it. Everybody knows that's an important thing, but they're just kind of, the site itself serves as testimony for that. And so they want, the sites I work with, and obviously not all sites are like this. Some sites actually do want that. That's kind of what they embrace. They're more interested in more kind of discursive, if you like, artworks and collaborations. So yeah, I think if I didn't have these discussions, if we go back to the gunshot audio work, for instance, if I was just an artist sat here and I'd been on Falstad's website and read the book on it, I might think, oh, that's a great idea. Why on earth would they not want that in their house of darkness. But I now, you know, from discussing with them, I'm now acutely aware that they know their audience better than me. So yeah, so there's that just in terms of the permissibility or ethics and morals of what you can do. Yeah, and I think working with different researchers, absolutely, yeah, and I think there's probably I don't know, 15 artworks for every one you've seen today. That could have happened, you know, because of, you know, whatever. On an evening, I ended up next to so and so at the table, and they're a memory studies expert. There's a researcher based in Vienna who I really want to work with, and I've never got the chance to sort of approach her on that basis, who kind of takes fictional and ghosts and stories like that and then attaches them to real incidents and discusses how kind of the fictitious nature of some recountings of that period kind of offers some historical understanding or insight into how it's looked at. So yeah, I think if I worked with Susanna in that context, yeah, it would be very different. But that's me wanting to work with somebody. Yeah, I've never. Whether I have a way of pushing people away I don't want to work with, or whether I've just not encountered them yet, I don't know.
It's really, really fascinating, and I think what you've done really skillfully here is to bring this mundane aspect of it, which I found worked really well, because again, I don't want to start a discussion for which we don't have time right now, but again, of course, working with this kind of sensitive subjects, we always risk being accused or aestheticizing trauma, which is not an easy topic to discuss, and I think you've really nicely avoided it by just bringing this back to this kind of very basic human activities, which I found was just really beautiful. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation outside of this meeting, and thank you so much for just talking to us about your really, really fascinating work, and thank you so much, Sam, for introducing Michael's work. I'm just going to take literally 30 seconds just to tell everyone what's happening next. So I'm just quickly going to bring back my slide. So the next session we are gonna have is a little bit earlier. It's usually I tend to go for last Wednesday of the month. Of course, next month is Christmas, so we're gonna have it on 15th of December. This is as planned, nothing has changed. For that, we have Associate Professor Nicole Brown from the Institute of Education at the UCL, and she's gonna be talking to us about creative methods. As always, I'll be adding all the core readings and case studies to Microsoft Teams. If there's anyone in this meeting who's not part of the Teams or who's not on my mailing list, just get in touch. I will add you in, and then you will have access to all of that things. And as always, let's just join the next meeting directly from the link. I'll be sending everyone an email. And again, get in touch once again if you want to get involved in any of the publications, festival, conference, and I will upload the recording from this session as soon as I possibly can, hopefully today, for anyone who didn't have a chance to join us today. So once again, thank you so much to Michael, Sam, and everyone in the meeting. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and wish you all a lovely evening.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you very much for the invite and the questions. Really, really appreciate that. I always have something to think about extra after these sessions, so thank you very much. And do get in touch if there's anything interesting to maybe talk about further at some point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.